data drought. What would cause a data drought? Well, in this instance, federal government shutdown, such that some of the data points you would normally be studying haven't been being released.
That's absolutely right. We really first saw this with the employment situation report that was supposed to come out 2 Fridays ago, because that was right after the government shutdown on October 1st. Frustrating thing about that was the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they had that data on that Tuesday. It's just that their IT department, they were non-essential. And so as a result, they couldn't post that report to their website on that Friday. And that has continued on. Now, this past week, we didn't get some of the trade data. And most of the time, I don't ignore it, but that's almost like the second or third tier kind of data. But now it is really important, especially with tariffs. We're trying to figure out what's happening with exports and imports and all the details there. So it is this drought. I'm really curious the extent to which we are going to actually have some longer lasting effects, because if the government isn't releasing the data, they're also not collecting the data. So the quality of the next few reports are probably going to be a little bit lower than what we have seen in the past. And a lot of people have already been kind of questioning the quality of this data anyways.
Yeah, the president being one of those people.
That's right.
You're talking about them having the jobs data but not releasing it. This feels a little like having the Halloween candy but not turning the porch light on.
That's right. Well, that's what I do, because I want to keep all those small Snickers bars for myself. But,
Right,
that's a little different motivation there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the biggest issue, I think, for a lot of listeners is the inflation numbers, because the July, August, and September inflation numbers, those go into calculating the cost of living adjustment for Social Security in 2026. And the data was collected throughout September, but now they need to get the statisticians and the IT people in there to crunch the numbers to release that. And so this past week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the commissioner, there's even though the commissioner was fired, there's like an acting commissioner there. Them and the Office of Management and Budget agreed that they should bring back the people to release that data by October 31st. So instead of coming out on October 15th, which is what it was scheduled to do, we are supposed to be getting those numbers October 31st, which from a financial planning perspective, I think is going to be really important, because if we didn't get those numbers, we'd still have to wait to figure out, well, what could your budget be for 2026? We could make some educated guesses about it, of course, but we'd rather not guess if we don't have to.
Yeah, and interestingly, some of that data impacts financial planning topics, as you mentioned, like Social Security COLA. Other points of data are more around like direction of the economy, right? Just being able to get a read as to where are we headed and how maybe the Fed is going to react to that. There are some spots where we do get data, however, right, which come from non-federal government entities and often are more forward-looking in nature. So we did get a few of those points from this past week.
We did. So this past week, we got the consumer sentiment numbers. It's a preliminary reading, meaning that they're going to continue to gather data and release a final number later this month. But that's from the University of Michigan. So they go out and they survey households, consumers, and ask, how are you feeling, right? How are you feeling about your current situation? How are you feeling about the future and your expectations? Thankfully, that number ticked up a little bit for the month of September, so that's somewhat encouraging. We also had the New York Fed, so the Federal Reserve banks, even though they are part of the federal government, they aren't subject to the same rules because it's also somewhat privately owned. They are owned by member banks, and so they continue to do their work. So they will release like their industrial production numbers, the consumer credit numbers, and this past week they released the survey of consumer expectations. That was really interesting because people are feeling like they're better off, but they're not feeling very confident because some of the details there, it's suggesting that inflation expectations are staying contained around like 3%. That's kind of the consensus for year ahead inflation. But the biggest worry for a lot of people is if they lose their job. There's not a high likelihood that people perceive that they will lose their job, but if they lose it, what's their ability to find a new job? That's where there's a little bit more nervousness. So those were probably the two biggest like confidence-related ones that are more forward-looking. Next week, we are going to be getting the Beige Book from the Federal Reserve. So this is a really useful device because they go around and they ask bankers in their district, business owners, consumers, community groups, what's going on. So they collect these anecdotes and they synthesize it and publish this beige book before their October 29th meeting. And that has actually been a pretty, I think, accurate reflection of what's going on the ground. You know, the hard data that we get, it's backwards looking, delayed, but this beige book is almost like kind of a more real-time, on-the-ground view about what's going on. And so I'm really curious to see what that says because it was, you know, the beige book, people were feeling a little glum back in April and May, but then it was showing incremental signs of improvement. And I'm hopeful that maybe that trend will continue.
So potentially maybe a bottoming of that economic data. Like, you know, I like what you say there, trends. I think a big part of this is to look at the direction of those trends. And so when you can start to see them maybe change direction at the inflection point, it might give us some, you know, incidental direction as we look towards where we're headed with the economy. And you need to synthesize that together then with what we hear from companies, because ultimately we don't invest in the economy.
That's right.
We invest in, you know, financial products, whether it's stocks or bonds, you know, alternative types of investments, all that impacted by things like direction of interest rates, political policy, economic growth, and types of economic growth, because it's not all created equally. So what do we see in terms of maybe what we're hearing from some of the companies early on in their announcements?
Well, so far we've gotten a few reporting, and the biggest ones I would point out would be some of a beer company saying that people are beginning to trade down to the lower priced beers. So, you know, that's, I guess, to be kind of expected. Plus, people are cutting back on drinking, and I thought that was interesting. One of the surveys that Gallup did, where it dates back, I think they started this 95 years ago doing the survey, only like 54% of adults say that they drink. Now, maybe people are lying, who knows? But there has been that trend where people are using other things instead of just beer to have a good time, I suppose. I'll just put it a polite way like that.
I wonder if we can read into that more people are willing to lie about it, or if there are alternatives, or just that many people are choosing not to drink, which is a healthy choice.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And then one of the other things that I would point out was Ferrari, luxury car company. Their stock was hit pretty hard because they delivered some lackluster growth forecasts, not expecting to see really a pickup in activity over the next 5 years. So they're almost like saying, hey, this is not just like a temporary thing, which is a little bit more worrying because if it's the higher income consumer who is the one who would probably buy a Ferrari, right? If they're the ones who are saying things are beginning to crack around the edges and they're beginning to trade down, does that mean that that engine of growth is going to start to sputter a little bit here?